Meal planning is important because it prevents us from being a disappointed wreck when dinner time comes around and we have no clue what to make, or even if we have the ingredients to make the meal. It's a time and a money saver, but most importantly, it frees up valuable brain space. Creating a meal plan prepares us for the week to come and gives us peace of mind that we're organized and can feed ourselves and our family. That's why I do it, and that's why Plan to Eat helps me do it. Your subscription includes access to the Plan to Eat website and fully featured mobile apps on iOS and Android. And Plan to Eat gives you the tools to clip and organize recipes from any website, the ones your family loves and that fit your dietary preferences and needs. And you can create a meal plan around your schedule. Then what happens is the Plan to Eat software automatically creates an organized shopping list based on your plan. So sign up for your free trial at plantoeat.com/timecrafting. That's plantoeat.com/timecrafting. The coupon will be automatically applied to your account and can be used when you're ready to subscribe. It's valid for new customers only. Give Plan to Eat a try today. I'm Mike Vardy, and this is the Productivityist podcast. Welcome to the Productivityist podcast. I'm your host, Mike Vardy, and this week on the show, my friend Chris Bailey joins me. He is the author of the book, Hyperfocus, How to Be More Productive in a World of Distraction. Now, Chris and I have known each other for a number of years, and so it's pretty easy for us just to dive into a conversation. We talk about hyperfocus versus scatter focus, what those things are, why he decided to write this book, and ultimately this idea of distraction, how we can get around it. There's just a lot to discuss. When you've got two Canadian productivity nerds talking, you know that you're going to get something special. I think this conversation was special. I hope you do too. Here's my conversation with Chris Bailey, the author of Hyperfocus, here on the Productivityist podcast. I'd like to welcome Chris Bailey to the Productivityist podcast. Chris, thanks for joining me today.
Mike Vardy, it's a pleasure to be here. How are you, man?
I'm doing really well. We had a chance to chat just before we jumped on to record, and it's been a while since we spoke. I mean, the Productivity Project's been... When did the Productivity Project come out? Let me take a look. It came out in... Oh my goodness. January 2016.
Yeah, man.
2.5 years ago. That's craziness.
Man.
And you've got a new book. You've got a new book.
Yeah, I do. It came out yesterday.
It's called Hyperfocus, How to Be More Productive in a World of Distraction. And to me, I would say that if we're going to have a guest on the show that talks about productivity, this would be you would be a good guest, and this would be a good book to talk about, because the biggest thing that a lot of people that I deal with, clients, et cetera, struggle with, and an audience is this fact that the world isn't just moving at a rate of speed that is hard to kind of just deal with, but then the distractions are just numerous. What was the impetus for you to say, I'm going to dive deep into this particular area of my work? Because your site's a life of productivity. You know, there's a lot of productivity stuff that you could, but why did you say, hey, you know what, this is an area that I think that I want to kind of, go into great depth?
Honestly, it was seeing myself struggle through these issues that I write about in the book. You mentioned the first book, The Productivity Project, and during the writing process, as I'm sure you're aware with, you're so focused on what you're creating and to get it out into the world, and you want to work toward that end result. And eventually there's the point at which the book was out into the world and it was doing well, it was selling well, the audiobook was doing well, it was translated into a number of languages, but then I found myself with significantly less to do over the course of the day. There are interviews and things like that. But I found that it's Parkinson's law, classic productivity rule, Parkinson's law, where my work was expanding to fit how much time I had available for its completion. And so because of that, what was expanding wasn't the important work I was doing every day. It was the distractions that I tended to. It was doing busy work. It was checking email more often. It was not taking my own advice that I had been giving for a couple of years up to that point. So I thought, okay, if I'm struggling with this, somebody who calls himself a productivity expert, quote unquote, maybe other people are too. So I started, it was kind of like another deep dive project in that way, where I thought, okay, why is this the case? Not just, of course, distractions are distracting. It's right in the name. But why on a neurological level are they distracting? And can we work back from the science and make that science practical so that we can work differently and better and more productively every day. So that was my intention, to create a book that was sort of an antidote to living in this world of constant distraction and interruption. And it was kind of selfish in a way. It was just as much for myself as it was for anyone who would happen to pick it up.
Well, what's the saying? Write the book that you want to see in the world, right? Write the book that you need to read, exactly. Right?
Yeah. And whenever you find yourself, I think, given advice without taking that advice, it's a good signal that there's something deeper there, I think. So I think that was the impetus for putting this book out.
So you look at the cover, great cover, by the way, and you see Hyperfocus. And a lot of people are like, to me, it creates like this anxiety a little bit, you know, like, I'm someone that's in the space. Well, the cover's red. There's the arrow pointing in a very focused direction. It's called Hyperfocus. And I talk about hyper scheduling, which to me, I actually, it's funny. David Sparks talks about hyper scheduling as well, but he talks about it in a positive sense. I talk about hyper scheduling, how it can be, if you hyper schedule yourself, then you could run the risk of being overscheduled and overwhelmed. Whereas, and I'm looking, when we go through your book, I want to talk about like how, if someone's looking at this going hyper focus, that sounds intense. Like intense. It's too much. Can you break it down a little bit so that people can understand, hey, look, this isn't about you going, it's not about like, you know, being super caffeinated and like just super driven. It's about, it's a very different, you know, a very different kind of idea of what type of focus it is.
Well, I think that's an idea that I keep coming back to in my own research, and I know you do too, that productivity is not about doing more, faster. It's about doing the right things and doing those things deliberately and with intention. And honestly, between us, Mike, and you know, I'd imagine a few listeners, hyperfocus was the best word that I could come up with to call this attentional state, where we are totally immersed in what we're doing. It's kind of like flow in that way. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's idea, who's this renowned psychologist. But hyperfocus is the process by which we get into a flow-like state, where we become totally immersed in what we're doing. And so that's what I really like the cover. It's very catching, and I hope people pick it up at the bookstore because of that reason. But that was simply the case. Is, you know, in practice though, hyperfocus it's slower and it's more deliberate and it's more thoughtful. You know, I define the 4 steps that, again, is based on the process by which we usually focus on something. And the first step to hyperfocusing on something out of 4 is choosing something that is productive or meaningful to focus on. And so this is something that we don't do often enough, especially when we work on that autopilot mode that essentially we're working on hyperdrive, where we're just working fast and frantically instead of with that deliberateness and that intention. And I think it's a calmer state. You know, if you think back to when you were the most productive, you probably weren't working fast and frantically. Maybe you were working a bit slower than usual, but you were working with a level of deliberateness and with intentionality that more than compensated for the speed at which you were working.
One of the things that I also love about your work, and there's some definite cohesiveness, is this idea of attention. And I think that people get really hung up on time management, priority management, even to a certain degree, because most people, and we've read about this with Greg McKeown's book, Essentialism, like priority was defined as just the next thing, there's no such thing as the word priorities, right? So I want to talk a bit about that. You talk about attentional space. People have probably heard about intentional space, and you know, you and I are very much in sync with productivity is about intention plus attention. I think that's clear. What is attentional space, and how can people navigate that? Because I think that's an area where, like you said, there's lots of distractions. There's a lot of things going on. Whenever we're in any kind of space, the chance of overwhelm creeping in is very high. How does someone navigate themselves through attentional space?
Well, like you said, and I know, like you continue to say, attention without intention behind it's just wasted energy, because you're not being thoughtful about what you focus on. But this idea of attentional space, and if you flip through the book, it's very visual. There's a lot of pictures. It's not a children's book by any stretch of anyone's imagination, but there had to be a way to bridge the research to how we can act differently every day. And there's this idea, not to nerd out. I feel like
no, you can nerd
the
out
folks
here.
Who listen to the show
Yep.
are fellow productivity nerds. So there's this idea of our working memory capacity, which is how many ideas and things we can keep in our mind at one time. And the way that I illustrate that in the book is by this little circle that indicates our attentional space. And so if we try to cram too much into that, we overload our working memory capacity, and our productivity falters because of that. This is one of those ideas that it kind of reframed the way that I thought about a lot of ideas in ways that surprised me, like especially around multitasking. It's a common refrain that multitasking doesn't work, but I found that there are cases in which it does. So who is somebody to say that we can't walk while we chew bubblegum, while we listen to an audiobook, while we avoid the cracks in the sidewalk? Our attentional space is pretty full at that point. We can't really process more in the moment, but we can usually manage a few habits at one time. But it's when we begin to take on things that are have added complexity, like the most important tasks in our work, for example, they're important because they require more of us. They take more attention to do right. They take time, but also, like you said, time management doesn't matter in a world of distraction as much as attention management does. Most of us are pretty good at managing our time. We can manage a calendar. We can show up to meetings on time. But if we can't then focus on what we've scheduled or what we've intended to accomplish, then it doesn't matter as much as it did before. But essentially, the idea is we only have so much attention to give to the world around us in the moment. And there are a lot of books on how to be more productive in general and take on better tasks. And this book covers a bit of how to determine what's important. But it's really on that moment by moment basis that the rubber meets the road, that we're distracted, that we're interrupted. And so by managing this space better and defending it better, by disabling distractions ahead of time, we can use our attention that much better too.
I had Ben Hardy on the show not too long ago, actually, about a month or so ago, a little bit more than that. And we talked about how his idea of willpower doesn't work. And you and I do agree. I think willpower plays a role, but I don't think it's you can't rely on it solely. But he talked about environmental choices and creating an environment that allows for your work to flourish and for your productivity and attention to be. You talk about that in the book as well, right? Like this idea of creating a space, not just this attentional space in terms of the mental component, but also the physical space. Yes. What are some of the things you recommend people do when it comes to, and some of it is probably stuff they've heard before, maybe something that they may not have heard before. Turning off your phone, all that stuff, airplane mode, we get all that. Yeah. But what are some of the other things you found? Because you are an experimenter. What are some of the things you found that said, hey, this will also help you in ways that maybe you didn't think?
Yeah, the phone thing is actually a pretty curious one, because the studies on that are, I've become one of these people who talks about studies all the time. But I love, this is honestly one of my favorite parts about writing this book is, the tactics, but how do they work? What's the science behind them? What studies have been conducted? And the ones on smartphones were actually pretty almost sad in a way, because you see, I write out of coffee shops quite a bit whenever I'm hunkering down on a project, and you see people who are connecting with one another over coffee, and they flip their phone down on the table. But that is still, like you said, it's a cue in our environment that a world of distraction is just within our reach. And I read one study where they were at a coffee shop and they observed patrons of the coffee shop, which actually sounds kind of creepy now that, like, you can imagine somebody just watching you with a clipboard, noting every time you pick up your phone. But they found that people picked up their phone every 3 to 5 minutes. And so that was times when they shifted their attention away instead of letting it wander, for example, on how meaningful that relationship was. And they surveyed these people after, and they compared them to the coffee shop patrons that didn't have their phone on the table. And they found that the people with the phone on the table they rated the conversation with whomever they were with as having less closeness to it, and that they weren't able to connect as deeply. And they even rated the quality of their relationship with that person lower. And so, the basis behind this study is the fact that the state of our attention determines the state of our life. If we cram it full of things, we're going to feel overwhelmed. And the less control we have over our attention, the less autonomy we have been shown to feel, the less we accept ourselves, the less happy we are, and even the less satisfied we are with our life. And the same is true with our kids, by the way. I don't have children yet. We're getting married in a year, so these things take time. But the kids rate their control over their own life as being lower, and they accept themselves less when they don't have as much control over their attention. But our environment, a smartphone is just one potential object of attention in our environment. So this is something that I would remind people to do, because I think we all know the best productivity tactics. But once you realize why, and once you realize the results of that distraction, like that your relationships are more shallow when your phone is nearby, you really begin to have the impetus for that drive to clean up that environment. So if you look around you in your office, wherever you might be happy to listening to this, every single thing in your environment can serve as a distraction. If you have your tablet open, if you have your phone nearby. But for me, I've used this research to my advantage, because these things serve as cues that a world of distraction is away. So in my office, looking around, I've got my turtle Edward, who's basking on his rock. I turned the filter off so people didn't complain about the background audio. I have noise canceling headphones. I have no phone, no tablet nearby, and there's a meditation cushion. There's a piano, which are things that are less attractive than the work that I want to be doing. And I think this is the key, is that what we see as a distraction is really just an object of attention that we can welcome into our attentional space that is more attractive in the moment than what we truly want to be accomplishing. And so Facebook will always be a more attractive object of attention than a report we need to be writing. Twitter will always be a more attractive object of attention than a conversation we're having. And so I think that's the key, is, look around you and think, okay, what around me is going to prevent me from doing this, like as Cal says, this deep work, or getting into this, like Csikszentmihalyi says, getting into this flow-like state, and is ultimately going to sabotage my productivity, because we have trouble resisting distractions. There's fascinating science behind that too, but it's our environment that makes a huge difference also.
Well, and as you're talking about this, I think it's important that people need to, as someone who meditates, and I don't meditate as much as I should, but I almost feel that you almost always have to meditate if you want to be properly paying attention to people. And what I mean by that is what meditation calls on you to do. So for example, if you're meditating, you're supposed to basically leave your mind empty, right? It's supposed to, any thought that comes to your mind, you're supposed to acknowledge that it's there and just let it go. Acknowledge it's there and let it go. I feel you have to do that every single moment in the day at this point, because if you and I are talking right now, and I'll be honest, like you and I are talking, and I have an appointment to go to after we're done here, and as we're talking, that part enters my head and goes, "Don't forget, you got an appointment." So I'm like, yeah, I know, I let it go. If I let myself focus on that appointment, which I'm not even in the moment of right now, then it's going to dilute the quality of the experience that you and I are having in a conversation, right? So I think that the tactics, or the process of meditation, what you should be doing when you meditate, can be exceedingly helpful when you are not meditating, if you want to cultivate attention to where it should be paid, right?
Yeah, and this is the thing. I think you hit the nail on the head. Meditation has some fascinating science behind it. And the research shows that when we have a consistent meditation practice, we talk about this attentional space, which we use to work on things, and we fit tasks into our attentional space in the moment. And so by managing the space better, we manage our life better. We manage our reality better. But we have 30% more attention to give to the world around us when we meditate. And the beautiful part about meditation that I think is underrated is, of course, it sharpens our attention. We're able to bring more focus to what's around us. But it is a practice of holding a single intention in our mind, which is remarkably difficult to do in the moment. So when we're sitting on the meditation cushion, our intention the whole time is to focus on the breath. And then we lose grip over that intention when our mind gravitates to think about work, or to think about a meeting, or to think about an appointment, or to remember some cringeworthy, stupid thing we said, yesterday, or whatever it might be, right?
Have you ever? Okay, so here's an interesting thing.
You come up with like the perfect witty response to something that somebody said to you 2 weeks ago,
or you've got this great idea that you want to capture in the moment, like you want to write it down, and you feel like you can't. Like here's when I knew I was actually meditating properly, and when I knew that it worked, is if you're meditating and it's that part of your brain that is always the primitive part of your brain that's trying to fire off triggers, right? And I remember sitting there and all of a sudden I had a tickle on my cheek. Like, how sometimes you get because you're focusing on the breath and I've let go of all these thoughts, and all of a sudden my brain was fine, I'm going to create some sensations on your body and see how you deal with it. And so I remember having a little tickle on a cheek, like just a little one. Sometimes those happen.
Was it your wife,
right?
Or no?
No, it was not. It was just a random like spasm. How sometimes those happen. And I remember my brain going, you should scratch that. If you scratch it, it's going to stop. And I'm like, no, I'm just going to let it go. And it stopped. Without me scratching it, it completely stopped. And that's how I think, like that was the real aha moment, where it was like, okay, there was a physical sensation that was happening with me. And I chose to stick to the rules, quote unquote. And it worked. It didn't, the sensation went away and it moved on. And I think that our brains, especially again the amygdala, the primitive part, is always going, how do we keep you from accessing the deeper the prefrontal cortex, that higher reasoning? Because all that part of your brain wants to do is really just get by. Like, can we just get by? And it's really, I think that there's there's fascinating science behind all that. And
it's quite fascinating with the cues as well. On meditation retreats, which I had the chance to attend.
Which ones have you done?
When I was in the process. They were a 7 and a 10-day Vipassana extended meditation retreat.
I've been thinking about doing one of those. They actually have them on the island here too.
Oh, what a better? Can you think of a better place than Victoria Island in the summertime?
No, I cannot. So what was it like? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, because I think that's something that I've read about it, and I'm like, oh, that seems like my son and I were talking about it, and he goes, there's people who I've heard that have done it that have just started crying because they can't do anything. Like, it's just such a sensory deprivation overload. Like, it's just a crazy experience. What was yours like?
It's remarkable because you begin to really sharpen your focus over the course of however long you do it. I think my first one was 3 or 4 days, which is it's a nice beginner length. It's not so intimidating as these 7 or 10 day ones. But we talk about the cues in our environment, and I think I write about this in the book a little bit, where we are you notice this on an extended meditation retreat, where you notice that your mind has been distracted, but then you find that you're able to draw the path of distraction back to the original cue that set it off. And it just goes to show how our minds are wired for distraction. So, you would hear a bird chirping outside, which would remind you of the bird in the square when you were in Paris 3 years ago. And then your mind goes off to the trip of Paris. And I was there with Kelly. I wonder what she's up to. I should check her face. And then you notice that you're in this well of distraction. It's like, holy crap, how did I get here? But you begin to draw things back. back. And if a bird can set you off, then imagine how your smartphone could. But the remarkable thing about the meditation practice is not only does it expand your attentional space, not only does it allow you to better defend that space and resist distraction, but it's just this beautiful way of living your life. Like you said, what is, I think any moment that we don't have an intention behind what we're doing is a wasted moment. Mm-hmm. And so after you choose that productive or meaningful object of attention, that first stage of hyperfocus, and you tame the external and internal distractions which prevent you from getting into it, then you focus on what you're doing and you continually draw your attention back to it, which is the fourth step, the third and fourth step. And so it's kind of like a meditative practice in a way, where you have your intention to focus on something. You eliminate the distractions so that you're able to accommodate that intention within that working memory capacity in the moment. So you can carry that intention with you as you go about your day, as you go about your work, and continually draw your attention back. You make, I would say that for every minute you spend meditating, you make at least 10 minutes back, because you're able to focus deeper. You become a better custodian of your attentional space. One of the most remarkable stats that I encountered in all these hundreds of studies that I dug into was that when we do work in front of a computer, we only work on one thing for an average of 40 seconds before we switch to doing something else. And when we have apps like Skype and iMessage and Slack open as we're doing work, that average drops to 35 seconds. And if you think back to your last most productive day, you probably followed through many of these steps. You knew what was important, whether you set an intention or not. You eschewed the distractions that came in. You brought your focus back to that thing, maybe because you're on a deadline and you had to do that out of necessity. This is our most productive state. And like you said, it's a bit calmer than the book cover might lead people on to, but at least that'll get them to pick it up, and hopefully the average person out there, maybe they're a bit less receptive to these ideas of slowing down and working more thoughtfully and more meditatively, like you said, but it'll get them in the door. And I think these are ideas that we all need. We need to choose more often what to focus on before we focus on it. It's so simple. It's so elementary, but hardly any of us do it.
Absolutely. Chris,
Sorry,
this has been, no. You know what? And here's the thing is that you and I could talk about this for hours. And we have in the past. We've sat in I remember the first time we had a chance to meet was in Ottawa. We were at Zach's Diner in Byward Diner. Yep. And we sat and we basically, I think we're there for like 2 to 3, like we were there for a couple hours just going. Yeah. Because there's not many of us that get a chance to get together and do that. And there's not many Canadians that get to do it.
No, not many Canucks that get to do that.
No, there's not many productivity nerds that are Canadians that we know of. If there are some out there, please let me know. But this book will help anybody, whether you are a productivity expert or strategist like me and you, or whether you're just like I need more focus. I need to get through and bust up these distractions. Hyperfocus, How to Be More Productive in a World of Distraction. The book is out now. It came out, yesterday. Chris, where can people pick up the book, and where can they learn more and find out more about what you do when you're not, writing books? Because I'm sure you're working on the next one already.
Usually on this meditation cushion or drinking green tea. Yeah. The book is available in bookstores everywhere. It's available in Canada, the US. This is something that I'd encourage folks to do. Is instead of hopping over to Amazon, go to the local retailer that sells books in your area, because these are great folks that they'll recommend other books that are like it that you might also like, and then you get the serendipitous aspect of it where you run into a book that you never knew existed simply because your eyes gravitated towards it when you were scanning the book. So it's available on Amazon. It's available in bookstores everywhere. It's available on Audible if you like the dulcet soporific sounds of my voice. But if you don't, then you should pick up the hardcover. if you find me annoying.
or you could say, when will the Canadian accent creep in? When will it creep in?
Well,
he said
I
a
don't
boot.
know, bud.
He said a boot.
Oh, he said a boot, bud. Oh my, holy boats, Mike, holy boats. So yeah, yeah, so it's everywhere.
And a life of productivity, right? That's the other. That's
a life of productivity.
I'm
so bad at promoting my stuff, but a life of productivity is my site where I write a column on productivity, and I'm at Chris_Bailey on Twitter. My publisher made me get a more professional username.
No more wiggle chicken, eh? No more wiggle chicken.
You're listening to the Chris Bailey 2.0, Mike. What do you think?
I like it. I like it. I like it. I mean, I can't wait to hang out with Chris Bailey 2.0 again. It's funny. We just talked about, as we're wrapping up here, that we're obviously recording this, in advance. Spoiler alert. But we're both going to be doing speaking engagements at the same time. I'm going to be near where you normally would be. And actually, it's funny because where you live is basically equidistant from Toronto to Montreal, really, in a lot of ways.
Yes,
it's pretty much equidistant. But you're speaking on the same day in Montreal that I'm speaking in Toronto. So we won't get to cross paths, but I can't wait for the next time that we do. We get to see each other in person. Chris, thanks for joining me today on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you to Chris Bailey for joining me on the show. Again, always a pleasure to talk to a fellow Canadian. Especially one that is so into productivity like I am. Again, the book is called Hyperfocus. And I think you definitely need to get it. I mean, he just puts a lot of real great effort into his books. I mean, you think like Cal Newport, there's another guy who I really admire because of the depth they go, and Chris really dives into the subject matter. So check it out, Hyperfocus. You can get it wherever books are sold. Of course, you can check out the show notes where it's going to indicate everything related to this episode. And if you like the show, please give us a rating or review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to podcasts, because John Polstra, my producer, and I, we will check out those reviews. We will do our best to make this show better, because that's ultimately the goal that we want to have. And by the way, if you want to take it a step further and you're like, I want to support, the show in another way, head over to productivityist.com/membership. There's some cool surprises there for you to check out how you can support the show in another way other than leaving a rating or review. But, I'm just happy you're here. I'm happy that you stuck around for the conversation. I'm happy that John Polstra produced this episode of the show. He produces a whole lot of them, and we've been working together for years, and really happy he took care of that. Big thanks to Chris Bailey for joining me, and of course, special thanks to you and my patrons for listening and being part of this show. That's it for now. I'm Mike Vardy, the host of the Productivityist podcast, reminding you, stop guessing and start going.